Can I just put a bit of a caveat to that, though?
Yeah, but,
We
no,
must
but
spend the money.
before you caveat it, do you
Yeah.
accept that is your position?
That is the opposition or my position.
Is that your position?
Well, you've been in this game long enough, and you know my position is the government's position.
We can turn straight to the Armed Forces Minister in the British government, Al Carns. Hello to you, Al.
Hi, John. Thanks for having us on the radio today.
It is a great pleasure to have you here. I must ask you first of all about Ukraine, of having just been talking to Igor Novikov there. It is worrying to hear such a well plugged in, highly informed player in Kyiv saying there is a real risk and a worry of Kyiv running out of the air defence weapons that it needs and losing the attention of its friends.
Well, I think the key point is that we now have we have one major conflict on the eastern edge of Europe, and we have another crisis evolving in the Middle East, which puts a significant strain on all sorts of systems, whether it be attention all the way through to resources. And I think that's an example of the difficult geopolitical situation we live in today.
And still, obviously, so important to keep focus on Ukraine. Now, I was talking a very short while ago to General Sir Richard Sheriff, you'll know, I'm sure, well, and he told me that the conflict in Iran has added to the evidence that the UK can no longer really call itself a major power. He said that was cloud cuckoo land. Al, do you recognise the truth of that? It's not an easy thing to hear, but do you accept it?
Well, I suppose it depends what you mean by major power. I mean, we have a significant capability in a nuclear deterrent, one of only two in Europe, which means we still have a major capability that indeed is the most effective or the backbone of our deterrent. Combine that with, for example, we have 1,500 Marines in the high north. We have a carrier strike group preparing to sail to the high north. We have assets in the Middle East now in a defensive sort of line backing. We have a submarine in Australia. We have multiple overseas or OPVs, which are ships kicking around both the Pacific and other areas of the world. We have a significant defense presence. We have some of the best forces in the world, of which I only left a year and a half ago and still serving in the reserves. And so I back our armed forces. I think we still have significant punch.
Well, that is the positive case for Britain's military strength. But you said just a week ago that you believe we need to accelerate defence spending to 3% of our national earnings by 2029, say by the time of the next election. That's not government policy right now. Al, were you given a telling off for saying that?
No, the PM said at Munich we need to move faster.
He did, but he didn't say, Al, 3% of national earnings by 2029.
Yeah, so I've been really clear, and I think the podcast you're talking about, which is the journalist, General and the Journalist, I was clear, and I backed the PM of what he said in Munich. I mean, it's a prime example of the situation we live in. I mean this, from 24 years in the military, I've never seen a situation so geopolitically unstable.
Yes.
And your previous speakers just highlighted that we have a major conflict on the edge of Europe with 1,000 casualties a day that is absorbing a huge amount of defense industrial resource. And now we have Iran with its reckless response engaging 10 other countries with ballistic missile attacks,
yes,
drone attacks, hotels, port facilities, airports that me and you will have traveled through. Some countries not engaged or involved in this conflict in any way, shape or form. And so it's a prime example just how unstable the world is right now.
Yeah, which is, again, clearer and clearer. And I wouldn't expect you to contradict the Prime Minister, but do you in fact believe that we should accelerate our commitment to defence spending to 3% of national earnings by 2029?
So I always want to get the right spending for defence. Can I just put a bit of a caveat to that, though?
Yeah, but before you caveat it, do you accept that is your position?
That is the opposition or my position.
Is that your position?
Well, you've been in this game long enough, and you know my position is the government's position. What I would say is that we need to spend the money in the right place to make sure we're properly equipped to deal with the threats that we face. And there's a prime example here of where, for example, in Ukraine, we've seen Shahed drones mixed with hypersonic and various types of very sophisticated missile systems.
Yes.
What are we seeing in the Middle East? The exact same game plan played out with ballistic missiles intertwined with low-flying, low and slow Shahed drones,
yes,
which create really complex problems from a air defense capability. We've got to learn those lessons. We've got to make sure that money goes to the right place. And we've got to make sure we're learning from these ongoing conflicts to prepare ourselves for any future threats.
Right. So let me put the point perhaps in this way. As a veteran of the Royal Marines, as a defence minister committed to the cause of Britain's defence personally, as well as part of your job, would you be a happy man and a happy minister to see the Prime Minister and the Chancellor just announce quite clearly in words of one syllable, we are going to hit that target or seek to hit that target, 3% of national spending, national earnings by 2029?
You're working really hard at this, John. And as an ex-military man, I'm always going to smile and sort of agree to ensuring our armed forces are funded correctly. What I would say, and I go back to this point, I left the military because I was getting frustrated with resources, money going perhaps on equipment that was being proven not as effective as it once was because of the war in Ukraine. And I want to ensure that resources is spent in the best possible manner to equip our armed forces to prepare for the threats of the future. And I mean that primarily uncrewed systems, cheap mass with sophisticated software combined with fourth and fifth generation capability.
Yeah, I mean you did say, I just observe, Al, that in your recent interview for the podcast General and the Journalist, you seem to be more explicit about saying you supported that target. You even said the Prime Minister was on the same page. Tell me this. I'm not going to keep on banging away at that door, but how long do you think we in the United Kingdom will last in this war in the Middle East as things stand with the stockpiles that we have?
So we need to be really careful of either hypotheticals or sound bites. War can take, and I've been involved in several wars or conflicts in the past, wars can take any turn at any moment of time. And a prime example of that is last Friday, we were in negotiations. And then by Monday, we've seen 10 cities or 10 countries hit with ballistic missiles, hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones. And so where is it going to go in the future? We don't know. And to try and predict that particularly on open media would be a fool's folly. What I can say to you is that there are some of the best planners, both in government and particularly in defence, that work through every eventuality to make sure our British interests, our citizens are protected, and that we can play a constructive part in a defensive operation across the Middle East.
Okay, look, I do recognise the difficulty of engaging in hypotheticals when it comes to an active operation taking place in the Middle East now. But a great many of your former military colleagues are saying, I mean, general officer after general officer, that we could be facing a major conflict where Russia is concerned in the space of a very few years. You yourself, Al, have said we could be involved in major combat in 3 to 5 years. Now, on this trajectory, on this level of preparedness, do we have anything like the stocks of air defence missiles and others that we will need to sustain that conflict for any serious length of time, as things stand?
So, John, I stand by that. 3 to 5 years, 2029 is what Europe's working on to sort of be prepared. And that's why you saw in the Strategic Defence Review, the first, 20 to 30 pages focus primarily on industry. Why is that? Because industries, societies and economies win wars. Our armed forces tend to respond to them. And so we've got to get our industrial base back in line. We've recognised the industrial requirement because of Ukraine. The rest of Europe has as well, Germany in particular, but other countries too. And we're working in collaboration with them to make sure our collective industrial base is ready to, in particular, deter the likelihood of conflict, because avoiding conflict means that we've deterred it effectively. And the last thing we want to be doing is fighting it, but we've got to be prepared to do so in order to deter it.
My last question. As things stand, we have, as a country, allowed America to use British defence bases for strikes at Iranian missile assets. Do you conceive it might be possible to see UK forces striking at those threatening missile assets ourselves?
So I've always said, not interested in hypotheticals. What I can tell you is we're not ruling anything out.
So it is possible?
I'm not ruling anything out because my history of being involved in these conflicts is that they can take any turn. Last Friday, we were in the US were in negotiations. By Monday morning, 10 different countries and 200,000 British civilians find themselves in the line of fire. And now, in the next 24, 48 hours, next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we may find this take any turn. What I can tell you, and I reassure the British population, is that our defence personnel, our planners, are doing the very best job to ensure they're prepared for any eventuality.
All right. Al Carns, Armed Forces Minister. Pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.